Jackson and Leah have been married for 5 years. Their whirlwind romance took everyone by surprise. Jackson proposed to Leah just a month into their relationship, and by fall they were walking down the aisle. Their parents repeatedly advised them to take their time, suggesting they spend more time getting to know each other better before tying the knot. But Jackson was hopelessly in love and didn't want to hear about any delays. They preferred a modest ceremony, deciding to save money for a future honeymoon in Italy rather than arrange a grand celebration. A year into their marriage, the couple began contemplating starting a family. After considering all the factors, they decided it was best for Leah to obtain a driver's license first, so she'd have the freedom to get around with the baby. Jackson readily paid for his wife's driving lessons. Come early September, like a diligent student, Leah attended her first class. Upon returning home, she eagerly recounted her experience to Jackson. "It feels like I'm back in school," she chuckled. Jackson cherished seeing Leah's smile. Her cheeks would dimple, and her eyes would gleam with happiness. One day, Leah asked Jackson to hire an additional driving instructor, explaining that she wasn't progressing well and the driving school didn't provide enough practice. Jackson agreed, and within a week, Leah was learning from the best instructor recommended by a friend. They drove together 3 times a week after work. After each session, Leah would come home in high spirits, eagerly sharing her experiences. As her training neared its end, the driving school exam and the traffic police test loomed. "Jackson, I'm still not confident with my driving. Maybe I should practice with Sebastian," Leah suggested to her husband. Jackson agreed, prioritizing his wife's confidence behind the wheel, especially since she'd be driving their future child around. On a Friday evening, Jackson waited for Leah to return from her lesson. He had prepared dinner, picked out a movie, and opened a bottle of wine to let it breathe. While standing on the balcony, he saw a car pull up to their house. A joyful Leah hopped out of the passenger seat, waving and laughing with the driver. Jackson felt a pang of jealousy. His possessive nature made it tough for him to see his wife interacting so comfortably with other men. Leah entered the apartment. "It smells amazing. I'm starving," she said, kissing her husband before heading to wash her hands. They spent the evening together in front of the TV. "When do you finish your lessons with Sebastian?" Jackson asked the next morning as he was getting ready for work. His jealousy over this unfamiliar man made him eager for their meetings to conclude. 3 more sessions, Leah answered while slipping on her boots. "I'm off to work. See you," she added, kissing him on the cheek before heading out the door. By the end of the week, Jackson wasn't feeling well. He asked to leave work early and headed home. After checking his temperature and realizing he was indeed sick, he decided to make some hot tea and spend the evening watching his favorite series. Leah had her final lesson with the instructor that day, and Jackson was looking forward to her return, knowing she'd tend to her ailing husband. It was drizzling outside. Tiny droplets fell in such abundance that the street's outlines were blurred. Wrapped in a plaid, Jackson stood on the balcony with a cup of tea, smoking and admiring the autumn scenery. Had his wife known he was outside in his condition, she would have been furious and ordered him straight to bed. Jackson smiled at his own musings. Then he noticed Sebastian's car pulling up to the house. This time, Sebastian himself exited the passenger side, walked around the vehicle, and, opening the door, extended his hand to help Leah out. Jackson watched as his wife beamed. They stood in the rain, seemingly oblivious to the droplets streaming down their faces and soaking their hair. Suddenly, Leah stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. She hugged him as if it were the last chance to hold him. They then conversed for a bit. Leah nodded repeatedly, and the man tenderly stroked her cheek. Finally, he kissed her on the forehead, and Leah dashed toward the house. "Jackson," Leah exclaimed in surprise upon seeing her husband sprawled on the couch. "Why are you home? Are you sick?" Jackson nodded silently. He avoided looking directly at his wife, fearing that if he met her gaze, he would lose control and shout about what he had witnessed. Leah, interpreting his silence as a sign of his poor condition, believed he was too unwell to speak. She brought him tea, dimmed the lights in the room, and left him alone with his thoughts. And Jackson had plenty to think about. It was the first night since their relationship began that they slept apart. Jackson was plagued by nightmares throughout the night. He woke up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding furiously. By morning, he was utterly drained. His head throbbed from the fever and lack of sleep. Leah was already making breakfast when Jackson walked into the kitchen. "How are you feeling?" she asked with concern. "I've been better." Jackson sighed heavily, covering his eyes with his hands. "And yesterday I had my final driving lesson." Leah smiled. "I'll ace the exam without any issues now." "And how exactly will you pass it?" Jackson snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "By sleeping with someone." Leah turned pale, freezing in place with a spatula in her hand as she flipped pancakes. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "Do you think acting like a schoolgirl means you can have affairs like you're 16 again?" Jackson looked at his wife, utterly worn out. Leah gripped the spatula so tightly her fingers turned white. "You saw. I told you not to go out for a smoke when it's cold," his wife said softly, sinking into a chair. They sat at the table in a heavy silence for a few more minutes. Leah was choking on her sobs. She tried to explain herself, saying that Sebastian had been the one to show interest first, and she had just been overwhelmed by her emotions. She cried against her husband's shoulder, her tears soaking his shirt. Jackson's head felt like a giant, searing ball ready to burst. Trying to alleviate the pain, he pressed his hands against his temples and shut his eyes tightly. The thoughts of what to do now and what the future held tormented him relentlessly. Perhaps everyone had been right when they said they were getting married too soon, that they hadn't had enough time to truly know each other. Maybe they shouldn't have rushed into it. However, despite everything, Jackson decided to try to salvage their relationship. But after a few months, Leah asked for a divorce. She couldn't keep deceiving her husband. Her heart still held a flicker of love for Sebastian, who continued to write to her, waiting for the moment she would leave Jackson. Jackson agreed. He realized their marriage had ended the day the truth came out, but for some reason, he had been desperately trying to fix something that was irreparably broken. Eventually, Jackson remarried a woman who loved him wholeheartedly and cherished their relationship. She gave birth to his daughter, and Jackson's heart belonged to this little girl forever. He knew that while marriages might not last forever, the bond with his daughter would always remain. Leah went back to her lover, and despite having 2 children together, Sebastian left the family a few years later. He continued working as an instructor, and it turned out that Leah was not his only student-turned-lover. In fact, he had been living a double life with 2 families all along. Leah's heart was shattered just as she had once broken Jackson's, but now her situation was even more challenging. She had no job and 2 children to care for, with no one to help. She realized too late that she had made the wrong choice, and it was a harsh lesson for her to learn. Having a driver's license was no consolation in her predicament.